I'm Jaega Wise and this is the food programme. For the team here, the festive season is all about good tastes and good company. And today we've got both. It's a life-through drink with the whisky writer and storyteller, Dave Broom. Oh my goodness, that is so good.
That's a delicious drink.
That is, it's light, effervescent, but that lovely pineapple hit
pineapple
trickling through.
Fresh. Oh, warming, spicy.
You know what, this feels like modern whisky. I'm in Brighton, it's grey and wet outside, but I'm having one of those working days when you really love your job. That's because I'm in a tiny whisky bar with Dave Broom, drinking a highball, and it's not yet noon. Dave's been writing about whisky for nearly 40 years, and is not only one of the world's most famous spirits writers, he's credited with helping transform how we think about whisky.
I just don't think anyone can underestimate how much Dave's word and his way of communicating has changed the way we communicate about whisky. He's created a sense of community with his writing over the years, and I don't think we can take that for granted at all. I think it's hugely important.
We'll hear more from Dawn Davies later. She's the head buyer at the Whisky Exchange, one of the major retailers. If you don't drink whisky, you've still likely heard the headlines about it. Scotland's success, billions in sales, although it's not as booming as it once was, something we'll come back to later. But that's not the whole story. Beyond the craft of more than 150 Scottish distilleries, there are people like Dave Broom, writers who've spent decades shaping how we understand whisky, its history, its culture, its flavour. Over the years, Dave has become one of whisky's most influential and recognisable voices. He's written more than a dozen books, translated into multiple languages, and appeared on radio and television to share stories of its past.
In 1863, this railway opened up the heart of this region. Scotland had become a bit of a theme park. The railway took the gentry north.
And its future.
If you look at Japanese whisky, the complexity is the same, but it's almost like a clear pond. You can see everything very clearly and very precisely.
Dave Broom in 2009 here on Radio 4, speaking about Japanese whisky. Exports of which, in the following decade, grew at unprecedented levels and have only in the last 2 years begun to slow. So how did this fascination with this drink begin? I meet Dave at his home in Brighton, down in his basement office, a small room lined with books, bottles and old photos.
I was born and raised in Glasgow. Went to university in Stirling, which was a bit of an extraordinary thing to do from somebody from Glasgow, because it was like going to the ends of the earth, even though it's only like 25 miles away. And then when I left uni, I lived in Edinburgh for a few years before heading south.
And was whisky always a part of your upbringing? Was whisky around the home? How immersed were you in whisky?
My dad drank whisky. My uncle worked for a whisky firm. So I suppose it was always there. And my dad would have 1 dram every night. And I got to an age where I was allowed to prepare his dram, which was a great honour. You know, it was like, you know, this is a great moment in your life where you sort of were starting to become an adult, when you knew how much water to add to your dad's dram. The whisky was always there. Never in excess, maybe until families got round and people would be singing songs and playing the piano and stuff, and more than 1 dram would be had on those occasions. It wasn't anything I particularly drank, because I was of that generation that kind of rejected their parents' drinks. So it was there, lurking, but you know, it was kind of an old man's drink in those days.
So what was your tipple of choice?
Of choice, growing up in Glasgow, it wasn't Buckfast actually, no. My first drinks would have been going to pubs in Glasgow and drinking beer, and noticing old men drinking whisky, you know, jugs of water and bottles of lemonade, and you know, everybody would be drinking their whisky dilute. And actually, my dad died when I was 15, and a couple of years after that, my uncle took me to the pub and bought me a whisky. And that was kind of that pat in the back going, okay, right, son, right, that's you now grown up. But even then, I didn't really drink it. There was the occasional half bottle smuggled into a tent as we were hiking, you know, mainly for central heating. But it took a while for me to really fall in love with it.
And how did that happen? How did you fall in love with whisky?
I fell in love with whisky when I was up visiting a friend, my oldest friend. He was working on a fish farm in the far northwest of Scotland, which is an extraordinary part of the world. And some other mutual friends were going to a ceilidh in Ullapool, which was about 30 odd miles south. So 3 of us had to drive down to Ullapool. And this is very Scottish, because our friends would have had a head start on us in terms of the drink. My friend Les decided we needed a degree of parity, shall we say. So a half bottle of Talisker was taken on board the car. The driver was not drinking, I hasten to add. And Les and I were kind of sipping from this bottle, not in an excessive way, but just having the odd wee toot. And it was then driving through that landscape, which is all these massive mountains, but like scoured out glens and bogs and lochans and this rugged coast, this kind of incredible primeval elemental landscape, and tasting that whisky, which was smoky and oily and rich, and it just said, this is where I am from. And that was the moment that I suddenly went, okay, now I get it.
After an English degree, Dave joined Oddbins, the off-licence chain, where he spent 7 years immersed in wine. Then came a move south to run a pub in Bristol. When the pub closed, he got a job with an off-licence trade magazine.
This was a time when bars were just beginning to open. So this is 1988 I joined. So you're just beginning to see the start of that kind of underground bar culture, opening up in London with guys like Dick Bradsell, etc. And single malt just beginning to take off. So I began going to distilleries, not just writing the business side of whisky, but also beginning to understand how it was made and what flavour was, etc., which was kind of what Oddbins had trained me to do. When I went freelance in 95, I began specialising in spirits because, well, A, it fascinated me, and B, it was an area that really hardly anybody was writing about. And there were 3 people writing about whisky at that point. My great friend and mentor Michael Jackson, my great friend Charlie McLean, being the 2 finest examples. But there's this kind of open field for writing about spirits.
This open field led him to getting some pretty wild commissions.
I suppose the first outlandish one was about the smuggling era in Scotch whisky, when effectively distilling in the Highlands became illegal. This is the tail end of the 18th century. But because the whisky being made in the lowlands was of very, very poor quality, there was almost like an economic imperative and then also consumer demand for this illicit stuff. So there's all this kind of great romantic stories of all these smugglers of taking whisky through the remote glens of Scotland. And I thought, well, why don't we do that? What would it be like to smuggle whisky from Glenlivet down to, we just decided on a whim, Balmoral Castle. And we did it with 2 Highland ponies and 2 wee casks of whisky on the side of it. And we were wearing kilts as well. And it was great fun. But it also gave an insight into imagining what it would have been like if you had the gaugers, the excise men on your trail. You wouldn't see that in a wine article, would you? No, you wouldn't. It's just a lot of fun.
I suppose now there are plenty of whisky writers around now. I mean, you being one of the first to essentially tell a lot of these stories in print. I mean, what does that feel like from today's eyes, looking back?
It's a great question. It's a funny one, thinking how things have changed. I think you had to do more work to try and convince people about it, that it wasn't just a drink that made you drunk. And it's almost like charting my own pathway through whisky. That, to begin with, you get obsessed with the production, the specifics, which are obviously important in creating flavour. But slowly but surely you kind of get into the stories and into the people and into the history.
How receptive were editors? How receptive were the public to what you were writing about at the time?
It's always been hard to place articles about spirits in mainstream media. Quite rightly, people are worried about, excessive consumption, which obviously you've got to be aware of. And in some ways, it was saved to a certain extent by specialist magazines. And that kind of answered the demand of that new whisky community. And also, maybe this is just me being Glaswegian and paranoid, you know. But there's always this idea that whiskey was a bit trade. Wine was kind of sophisticated, and it was made by blue-jacketed French people with, you know, golden secateurs and, you know, and whiskey making was industrial, a bit rough. And I got that vague element of snobbishness, which is frustrating, you know, because it's a drink that is made by people. It's a drink with incredible heritage, etc. It's just a drink that deserves to be written about.
And you were writing about whiskey during the single malt revolution. I mean, can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that was extraordinary. So 90% of Scotch whisky sales blended. Okay. But this thing called single malt had been available. You know, single malt's available in the 19th century. But as a category, it's relatively recent. And the reason for that came from the great economic crash in the 1970s, the oil crisis, etc. And also this generational shift, of which I was one, away from your father's and grandfather's drink. As a result of that, what you saw was the bigger companies having this whiskey loch and then beginning to finally dip their toes into this world of single malt. And it took off because suddenly you're talking about this word single. It means it's coming from this one distillery. And this distillery produces flavours that no other distillery anywhere in the world can reproduce. And that is exciting. This idea of provenance and flavour, which then also tied into food, just became something that people began to be interested in. And people began to discover flavour, which I've always maintained is the way to try and educate people about whiskey. Don't talk about regions, don't talk about, you know, weird processes. Talk about flavour. And it was driven by geeks like me, or other geeks, who then excited people like me, who began to explore it. It was driven by independent bottlers like Gordon and MacPhail. So it was built from the roots up. And what you find from these older whiskey lovers is how generous they were. You know, if they had a bottle of what is now an incredibly rare whiskey, they would share it. And there was a huge amount of incredibly rare whiskey about that we've all drunk, and now, you know, to some extent, perhaps regret because it's now worth tens of thousands of pounds. But anyway, you know, that's that's a side issue. But you know, that generosity and that idea of building a community was central, and I think it's changed the image of whiskey as well.
Can you touch upon the whiskey crash you just described? I mean, what was happening at the time? What's the background to it? Essentially,
Scotch whisky had pretty much a clear run from the end of Prohibition all the way up until the 1970s. There was obviously a blip during the Second World War, but the American whisky industry had shut down during Prohibition. The Irish whisky market had completely disappeared as well for various other kind of political reasons, which kind of left Scotch bloodied but the last man standing. And there were stocks of whisky available post-Second World War. And Churchill actually said, you know, export whiskey because, you know, that's the way to get cash back into the British economy. And because Scotch was essentially the last man standing, it just kind of took off. So it took off all around the world. And as a result, you have, let's say, 25 years of unparalleled success. But then you have the oil crisis of the 70s, costs rise, whiskey prices begin to rise as well, plus that generational shift of a complete rejection of old drinks. And whiskey was one of them, cognac was one of them, gin was one of them as well. So by the 1980s, you have supply continuing to rise. So you end up with this whiskey loch. And as a result, a huge number of distilleries closed down. When I started writing about whiskey, which was 88, there were less than 70 distilleries operational in Scotland. Today, there are pushing 160. And the growth in the industry, to be honest, is very recent as well, as is the global growth of whiskey as well. There have never been so many distilleries making whiskey around the world. And that is extraordinary. And that really is the past 10 years that you've seen this breaking free of the old guard.
My name's Nicholas Morgan. I've worked in the Scotch whisky industry since 1990. I'm currently consulting and writing, mostly historical writing about whisky. And I think I must have met Dave Broom in around 1994 or 1995. Few people, I think, would really have believed that whiskey could be so vibrant today. So many distilleries around the world, so much interest from consumers. And part of that, I think, has been because what was relatively a secretive industry in the 1980s and 1990s has really opened itself up. And part of that was encouraging writers, and particularly Dave Broom, to come inside the world of whiskey to really understand how it worked. And that's really what Dave's done. He's blown the world of whiskey open. He comes to whiskey with a much greater sense, I think, of the cultural and social resonances around whiskey, wherever it's made, not just in Scotland. So there's a depth to Dave's writing which you don't see in many other people's work. It's hard in the world of what you might call commercial writing for people to be independent. But I think actually Dave is respected for his independence and authenticity. I think people look to things that Dave has written and will follow the course that he sets out in some of the issues and campaigns that he's been involved in. A few years ago, I was in a band actually performing at the Isle of Whisky Festival. And we wanted to sort of test the patience of our audience, who are all deep whiskey enthusiasts. And we were going to do this by getting Dave to make a cocktail with what purported to be Port Ellen whiskey, which is one of the most famous, expensive single malt whiskies you can get from a closed distillery, much mourned by whiskey enthusiasts. So Dave stood in front of an audience of hardcore whiskey maniacs, making this cocktail, this absurd cocktail. Oh, it was disgusting. It was one of these, what else can we put in it which will horrify people, you know? And the body language from these people was absolutely astonishing to see. Of course, the fact of the matter was we weren't using Port Ellen. It was another whiskey from a Port Ellen bottle. But Dave was like putting his head into the lion's mouth by doing that. And it was very good fun.
Nicholas Morgan. As he touched on there, Dave has been writing about whiskies from outside of Scotland too. He told me he thinks he's probably visited about 40 countries now to visit distilleries and write about spirits. So where did that interest start?
I was brought up within the Scotch whisky industry. I was aware of bourbon. You didn't really see bourbon over here. I remember in Edinburgh, there was one bar where you could get wild turkey. And I was really excited about that because I was a big fan of Hunter S. Thompson. Hunter S. Thompson drank wild turkey in excessive amounts. So I began to become interested. And in those days, there were only 2 distilleries operational in Ireland, but they were making really fascinating whiskies. So that kind of got added on. But I think the big breakthrough for me was Japan. And I was always interested in Japan from an artistic and literary point of view. So I was interested in Japanese writing, poetry, art, film, design, Zen, blah, 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 everything. And then year 2000, I was invited to attend Whisky Live in Tokyo, which was the first consumer whisky show outside the UK. And my eyes were opened to this deep philosophical approach to whisky making and realising the high quality of them. And it took a few years for the public to get on board because, you know, Scotland is whisky. No one else is allowed to make it. But Japan kind of broke through that. And then you began to see whiskies emerging from all around the world.
Talk to me about fan culture. So people will hunt down, especially single malts from a new distillery. I wanted to know, how has that changed? Has it always been that way? Have people always been queuing up outside of new distilleries to get hold of that bottle? For taste and for fortune, potentially?
For taste, to some extent, yeah. So I would say when new distilleries opened up, people were genuinely excited by that. I think the queues that you're seeing, which are probably online more than anywhere else, are now sadly driven by financial gain. And it's concerning for me because rather than buying that bottle to share or to open for a special occasion, whiskey's kind of been bought as an investment, and it loses what makes it special. Whisky's joy comes from its destruction. You know, I can understand how a finite supply will drive prices up and why a luxury whisky segment should exist, because that's fine. But it can't be what drives whisky. And what has worried me over the past few years is that this obsession with this ultra expensive top end is somehow driving whisky rather than the mainstream. You know, whisky has always been and should always be a drink for people. And as soon as you dry that out, then the whisky plant begins to die. So yeah, I think there is still fan culture, but I do believe that a lot of the older whisky fans are now kind of disenfranchised. Sorry, I'm just depressed.
No, I find it fascinating because whisky does have this top end. What's the most expensive whisky you've ever tried, for example?
Most expensive, over £100,000. You know,
it makes you want to cry.
But you know,
as a beer brewer, that makes you want to cry.
Yeah. You know, and you sit there with your little vial of whiskey, which gratefully received, and you just wonder, wow, why and who's going to buy that, etc. Some justify the price. You know, Gordon MacPhail just released an 85-year-old Glenlivet, which was extraordinary whiskey, and fair play to them. They have done tastings around the world allowing people to try this in the knowledge that nobody in that room would be able to afford a bottle. But I can understand why that whiskey is expensive.
I mean,
but it'd be interesting to see a £100,000 beer, wouldn't it? You know,
most expensive beer in the world.
Yeah,
50 quid.
Yeah, you see, whisky does have an awful lot to learn from beer. Now, in terms of beer has always been available for people. And that is beer's success. That is why so many, of my friends who are whiskey geeks, and myself included, are probably more interested in beer these days. Or we're interested in rum, or Armagnac, or Calvados, or whatever, mezcal. When you drink spirits or you drink beer, you have this direct connection between yourself and the person who is making it. So that provenance is insanely important. And I think as soon as you begin to fracture that, then you're in trouble. When you lose that direct connection, when it costs you £200 to go around the distillery, or you can't afford that whisky that you loved, it's concerning, and firms should be concerned about it. Because as I said, I've got no objection to the fact that there is a luxury end to it, that's fine, but it can't be what drives the category. It's what I call the Tinkerbell theory. The panto of Peter Pan. When Tinkerbell is dying and Peter Pan goes, "Do you believe in fairies? Say you believe in fairies. If you believe in fairies, Tinkerbell will live." And the whole audience goes, "I believe in fairies." And then that's kind of what whiskey is like at the moment. I believe in fairies. And then as soon as one person goes, "Actually, I don't believe in fairies anymore. It's just a light," then it's gone. So a lot of this is just being driven on belief, on this belief that you're going to make a huge amount of money. And people are now beginning to go, "I don't believe in it anymore." And if whiskey has detached itself from that mainstream as a result of this chase towards high cost and beautiful packaging, then it's in trouble.
And right now, the Scottish whisky industry is feeling that tension. New export tariffs to the US have hit sales, and demand has dropped with a squeeze on consumer spending. Just last month, 2 malting plants in Scotland stopped production because of what was called a medium-term reduction in demand. This is a Life Through drink with whisky writer Dave Broom. Over his 40-year career, he's written 15 books, including The World Atlas of Whisky, Whisky the Manual, and A Sense of Place. His work has been translated into 17 languages and sold around the globe. But believing in whisky isn't just about numbers. For Dave Broom, it's about experience. So, time for a tasting, or maybe an experiment.
So you're going to show me some whiskey?
I'm going to show you some whiskey. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pair some whiskey with music.
I've heard about this.
Yeah. So this wonderful Professor Charles Spence from Oxford University, came across this phenomenon that all our senses are continually working together. and not just in terms of synesthesia, but actually just this is how we work our way through life. If you taste some whiskey or spirits or whatever on their own and then play a piece of music, the piece of music will help to highlight specific flavours within the whiskey that you may not have already noticed. So it's a lot of fun. And I thought, since it's Boxing Day, that we would do something with a Christmassy whiskey.
I am so up for this.
We begin by tasting without music.
Okay, so for our Christmassy whiskey, I thought I kind of pushed the boat out because we're celebrating, are we not? So what I've got here is Tamdhu 21-year-old. It's at 47.5, so be aware. And it's been aged exclusively in sherry casks.
Okay.
To start, we just use our noses.
I mean, one way that I often teach people is that if you are stuck, I mean, people kind of get a bit scared about it and feel they don't have the language, the descriptors, although they're quite happy describing food. And one way to get around that issue is to say, what season is it like? So you have spring whiskies, which are very light and fresh and grassy and lots of blossom. And you have summery whiskies, which are a bit more, languorous and soft and lots of gentle fruits and sweetness coming through. You have autumn ones, which are a bit more fruity. And then you have, I would argue, quite a Christmassy one here.
This is very Christmassy.
Why is it Christmassy?
Because it smells a lot like Christmassy things. So lots of mince pie and raisin and a little bit brandy, and it smells like Christmas.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's got those kind of mulled spices, that mixed pale. I've always found that really fascinating. That people are kind of struggling and they're going, I'm not very sure what to say. And you say, what season? And all of a sudden it's like the light bulb has gone on. Anyway, let's have a wee taste. And the first thing, think about texture. So think about the feel of the whiskey rather than just the flavours. So, just a little sip.
God, that's so good. I expected it to be good being in your house, Dave, but goodness me.
Yeah. And it's long, it's quite silky. Got all that kind of dried fruit coming through.
Very long finish.
Really, really long finish. A tiny little bit of spice going on there towards the end. But yeah, just a lovely kind of mouth-filling dram. Great drams force you to drink them slowly. And that's why you don't really get drunk if you're drinking really good whiskies. You're just sipping them because they're objects of contemplation.
Next, Dave puts on some music. To start, something slow.
It feels so relaxing.
Absolutely. It's softer. It seems to just pool there in the middle of the tongue. It's become really gentle. There's none of that kind of spicy element really coming through. It's just a tiny bit at the back. It's become darker and richer and chewier. Simply because the music is there. So the music is...
the mood was shifted.
Yes, the music's giving you the idea of mood, and the whiskey and your taste is kind of aligning itself with the fact that your mood has shifted as well. So the whiskey hasn't changed at all, but your perception of the whiskey has changed.
Dave, that's pretty special.
Next, something very different. This one gets us both moving, bopping about the office, and the flavours, well...
That was really interesting, because that was spicy.
Yeah.
That was very spicy.
It's mad.
The energy, the movement, all of a sudden, all those tingly, spicy flavours really came through.
They absolutely rushed forward. All that stuff that was kind of lurking at the back, and then with the slow music, you didn't really notice it. And now it's reversed. That your mouth is just full of these wonderful kind of gingery, mulled, spicy characters with the rest of that thickness just lying there underneath. It's been completely turned on its head simply by a piece of music.
For writer Dave Broom, this isn't a gimmick. It's a way of bringing people in and sharing the drink he so enjoys.
You've got to find new ways, you've got to find new fun ways of talking about it, because whiskey's about putting a smile on people's faces. Yes, you can be serious about it. Yes, you can be geeky about it. And I am a whiskey geek. But if you're wanting new people to come into whiskey, then you've got to give them a reason to enjoy it.
Well, our dancing shoes, I really did enjoy that.
That's good, wasn't it? Yeah.
That idea, whiskey is something playful, something personal, has rippled through the industry. Dawn Davies, head buyer at the Whisky Exchange, says Dave Broom helped make this happen.
I just don't think anyone can underestimate how much Dave's word and his way of communicating has changed the way we communicate about whiskey. I think I've learned from Dave, and I don't go out there and, give facts and figures. I talk about the people, I talk about the stories. That's what people want. People engage with people. They don't necessarily engage with product. And he really brings the people and the place to the fore. And I think he's created a sense of community with his writing over the years. And I don't think we can take that for granted at all. I think it's hugely important.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, whiskey can be seen as a bit of a highbrow drink. Do you think Dave has changed that?
100%. I mean, he's never said, okay, this is how you drink it. It was him that came up with the smoky cokey, which was Lagavulin and Coca-Cola. I mean, the kind of whiskey geeks were like, what do you mean? Mixing this wonderful liquid with Coca-Cola. But it's such an amazing drink. He's really brought kind of the culture, and I guess it's testament to how many bartenders and how many of the kind of industry have so much affection for him, because he didn't just use whiskey in the context of, you must have it in a dram and you must kind of drink it by the fireside smoking a pipe. He was like, it's fine to mix. It's fine to have a highball. It's fine to put ice in it. It's fine to be irreverent with it. And I fundamentally believe he was the person that really kind of kicked that off and changing the dialogue about how we think about whiskey as a community as well as kind of the consumer. I think it's on both sides.
Dawn Davies. That sense of coming together seems to run through everything he does. A few years ago, he helped make a crowd-funded film called The Amber Light, another example of whiskey lovers joining forces. It took him across Scotland, meeting distillers, musicians, writers, and exploring this idea that whiskey reflects the place it comes from. One of those conversations was with Ian Rankin, one of Scotland's best-known authors. They talked about how whiskey connects to identity and a concept Ian remembers from his university days, the Caledonian antisyzygy.
So it's that kind of tension between polarities. It's in all of us, this Jekyll and Hyde, this tension between doing good and breaking the rules.
Do you think that anti-syzygy thing is a peculiar Scottish phenomenon?
It permeates our literature in a way that I don't see in other cultures. Maybe it's peculiar in some ways to smaller countries that feel smothered by bigger cultures next door to them. But I do think that there's a darkness in the Scottish soul. You've got long dark nights, right? Long dark nights when we just tend to sit and brood. We brood, we drink whiskey, and we read books.
Yeah.
Ian Rankin speaking to Dave in his film, The Amber Light, now on Netflix.
Hello.
But there's no brooding inside with a book for us.
Hi everyone!
Despite the rain, we leave the warmth of Dave's home and head to a bar that encapsulates some of what we've been hearing about.
Well, we're in Cut Your Wolves Loose, which is in the North Lane of Brighton, and which is a wonderful den of whiskey marvellousness.
It is beautiful.
It's amazing, yeah. It's a tight space, as all great Japanese bars are.
But the kind of tight space that I can imagine you make a lot of friends in here.
That is the idea. Everybody is sitting very close to each other, and that's the beauty about whiskey as well, isn't it? That you end up chatting with each other. Oh, what are you drinking? Oh, I'm drinking this. Can I try that? And it's that thing about community again. The thing I love about it is it's not your traditional whiskey bar, which is normally big leather armchairs and very dim lighting, and this ridiculously old school masculine space. This has got graffiti everywhere. There's wonderful street art that's continually getting changed on the back wall out there. Everything is accessible. It's just open. It's encouraging a new whisky generation.
So the idea was no tartan, no, like Dave said, no leather armchairs.
Cut Your Wolf Loose's general manager is Paul de Newton.
You could call it an art bar, you could call it, just a cool place to hang out. That's the idea. You've got to create a space that everyone wants to be in, and then we just happen to have filled it with loads and loads of whiskey. So if you're a whiskey drinker, you're a kid in a candy store, but if you're not a whiskey drinker, you're perfectly comfortable as well.
Can I ask you, why have you chosen to go down the no tartar, no leather armchairs approach?
Because it's restricting. We want every gender, every lifestyle, every everything coming in here, and if you lean into those preconceptions, then you immediately create a less welcoming space.
You think about it, all the rules that kind of get built up about whisky. It's a drink for men. It's a drink to be taken at a certain time of day. It's a drink to be taken neat. It's a drink to be taken out of a specific type of glass. All of that. All of these are negative. They're saying, no, you can't drink it. And one of whisky's greatest hurdles has been getting rid of all these preconceptions. It's just so ridiculously restrictive. And so a place like this just opens up the possibility and actually says, whisky is amazing, but it is just a drink.
Paul says they've got around 450 bottles here open, but he's always happy to make recommendations.
Given it's a Dreich day in Brighton, what would you recommend?
Well, I know you have a soft spot for highballs.
I do indeed.
So how about one that Hugo created that's kind of pineapple-y spicy and coriander-y and it's called Taco Tuesday.
A whiskey highball is a long drink. Whiskey, a mixer like soda, and lots of ice. This one is the same concept, but a bit different.
We did this a little while ago. Brighton had a whiskey festival and we were approached to come up with some drinks for it. So we put some monkey shoulder and we infused it with coriander, and then we added what would normally be a non-alcoholic ingredient with cross sip. They do it like a spicy pineapple. And then one of the other sponsors of the festival were Double Dutch, and they got a cucumber and watermelon mixer. So you got lots of fresh, spicy, mixed flavour. So it really is like that kind of taco where you've got a bit of warmth, but you've also got a bit of freshness on top.
Oh my goodness, that is so good.
That's a delicious drink.
That is, it's light, effervescent, but that lovely pineapple hit
pineapple
trickling
kicks through, fresh, warming, spicy.
You know what, this feels like modern whiskey.
I mean, the thing is, this idea that whiskey should only be neat is a pretty new thing. Any time that whiskey's been popular throughout its life, it's been mixed, as a toddy, as a highball, as a cocktail, whatever. It's only recently it's kind of, oh no, you can't do this, you can't do this. You're abusing the drink by adding anything to it. I think especially at the moment where all drinks are going through a bit of a tough time, you've got to find out what the occasion is, what people are drinking, how they are drinking it, and take a step towards them. It doesn't mean you lose your heritage or you make whiskey something that it isn't.
This is fantastic, by the way. There's a real lovely spicy kick to it. What about whiskey's future?
I think we're in a tough time at the moment. I think the green shoots are beginning to appear. I think whiskey will come out of it in probably another 3 years. But the point is that whiskey is resilient. When we do emerge fully from what the industry is going through at the moment, what you are going to see is incredible diversity of flavour from all these different countries, engaging with their conditions, looking at what grows around there, whether that's barley or rye or wheat or spelt or whatever, smoking with different things, not just peat, but wood or nettles or sheep dung or elephant dung, which have been done and continue to be done. I think whiskey is also becoming a little bit more like wine in that respect, insofar as you have the big companies with the big brands, and it's brilliant because if you're selling tens of millions of cases, that's great. That's getting whiskey out to many, 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 many people. But at the same time, this array of smaller independent distilleries, just like smaller wine producers, who are really kind of pushing the envelope a little bit in terms of what flavours can be produced.
What about younger people moving away from alcohol? Is that changing the whisky industry?
I think the whisky industry is, like any drinks industry, is cognizant of this. At the moment, I think the big companies are kind of scrabbling around and kind of being a bit desperate in trying to see what will fit. I mean, you're already seeing indications that this idea of Gen Z completely moving away from alcohol not actually being true. They're just drinking it in a different way and drinking it on different occasions. I think you have to be aware of drinking less, the need to have no and low alcohol alternatives. I think whisky can come in with highballs, for example, which is a low alcohol serve, but it's so important to get people through the door. What I'm not noticing is people rejecting whisky. So in the 1980s, a generation rejected whisky because it was old-fashioned. I think what's happening now is that there's just a reappraisal of what alcohol is. But I don't think it's the end of booze, and I don't think it's the end of whisky. I think people need to start talking, to be perfectly honest. I think people in bars such as this, or retailers, the whisky industry needs to talk to the retailers, needs to talk to the consumers. What do you want? It's been kind of dictating what people want rather than asking what people want.
Dave, can I ask about your legacy? You're one of the most respected people in whisky. I mean, how do you want to be viewed?
I mean, I don't think about stuff like that, really. Just as somebody who told good stories, I think. I mean, I'm just passing stuff on. My job as a writer is to ask people why, and to get the answers and to write them down in a manner in which is approachable and perhaps informative, maybe occasionally entertaining. But I'm just a conduit for the great people who make whisky and have made whisky for all these years. So my role in it is actually very, very small. So I don't think about things like legacy. I just tell stories.
With a good dram.
With a good dram. And a wee dance, maybe.
Dave, thank you so much. What an honour, what a pleasure.
Oh, the honour was all mine. I'm flattered. Great to see you, Jaega.
Hi, it's India here. I'm very excited to bring you the return of Child. So we've been on the journey of an embryo all the way to a baby's first birthday. And now we are going to enter the explosive life of the toddler, because this is the perfect place to unpick the very complicated world of emotions, the emotions that affect us all. So come with us as over 8 episodes we fall through the abundant and dizzying world of happiness, descend into the depths of fear and the gendered and dangerous world of anger, and then crawl, wobble and bounce our way through awe, love, anxiety and surprise. From BBC Radio 4, this is Child, with me, India Rakison. Listen first on BBC Sounds.